What's going on, Diablo fans? Dobrunsky here, and today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about a type of combat that I almost never play in D2R, and that is, of course, Melee. It is my least favorite form of combat ever. I would much rather play a caster character, but I found this very interesting blog post on the official Diablo forums. I'll have it linked in the description below. Crescendo made a couple very interesting suggestions, actually 11 of them, to substantially improve Melee for patch 2.6. So I'm going to review every single one of these suggestions because I think most of them are spot on. They would have a pretty profound impact on Melee, but I don't think they would necessarily have as large an impact on the game as what the introduction of Sunder Charms did, which I know a lot of people are on the fence of whether or not they like Sunder Charms or they didn't like them. But again, the idea behind this video is to stimulate some interesting discussion. So guys, please let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree, disagree, or would tweak any of these proposed suggestions. Other than that, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Let's jump in. So the first point is to remove the melee hit cap. So for those that don't know, casters can hit 100% of the time, but melee can only reach up to 95% chance of hitting. So it's like, no, 5% of the time you were forced to miss. And with melee already being at a disadvantage, I really don't see this being a bad change. The only thing though is, in theory, while it might make sense to have melee reach 100% chance to hit, I don't know how effective it actually will be, because a lot of rune words, like Grief for example, that have ignore target defense, allows you to achieve 95% chance to hit on all white monsters. Now, it's true it doesn't apply to champions, bosses, and act bosses like Bale, but I don't know in theory with the majority of melee characters currently using Grief how much of a difference this actually will make. But in theory, I think the idea of it makes sense, and it's definitely very difficult to achieve a even 95% chance to hit Bale with a melee character. Like, I think with the best possible gear, you might be edging up around like 85 to 90%, depending on how much percent attack rating you have. And then it's even worse against Ubers. So unless they change something to allow melee to reach that 100% chance to hit a little bit easier, I don't see this actually having a big impact, although the idea I think is sound and makes sense. So the second point is to either remove or alter the defense penalty while running. And I think this makes sense because for those that don't know, you could have, for instance, a Frenzy Barbarian with a high level Iron Skin investment, Shout, very high defense fortitude. So you could be approaching like 20,000 defense and have a very low percent chance of being hit. But then as soon as you start running towards monster pack or running while positioning yourself during a melee encounter, your defense drops to 0 and you're more likely to be hit. So we're already punishing melee with a chance to hit. Why are we also punishing it with the chance to be hit as well? I think this would be a welcome change, would make defense a more valuable stat. So you might be hunting for higher defense-based armors or higher defense-based shields or whatnot, just to try and stack more defense to have a less percent chance of being hit. For those that aren't aware, that's how it works. The higher percent defense you have, the less likely you are to be hit. So I do think this is a welcome change. Is the best approach to remove it entirely, or maybe have it be a percentage-based approach? So the more defense you have, maybe the less it removes, if that makes sense. So if you have like 10k defense, maybe you lose half of it while running, but then if you stack more defense, it reduces like only 40% percentage or something like that. I don't know exactly the best approach here, but it would be nice to make defense have a little bit more value in my opinion, and I do welcome this idea or concept of change. Point number 3 is very similar to point number 2, and that's just either removing or altering the percent chance of block system while running. So again, similar to defense, if you have a 75% chance to block and then you're running, it drops that percent block rate chance. And again, it's just another punishing aspect to melee. So they're already slower in clear speed. They're very gear dependent, more so than I would say a caster is, at least initially in the early leveling phase. And then you're being punished while running for your chance to be hit and also your chance to block. So I think removing or altering would maybe incentivize melee characters to potentially wear shields more often. Like maybe you would see more Whirlwind Barbarians maybe using like a Phoenix shield so they get the enhanced damage and they could run a higher block percent build for a little bit more survivability. It would just offer a couple other options in my opinion, other than just always walking and teleporting as a max block character to avoid this penalty. And I think it's a good idea and concept. The next suggestion is to provide melee with some form of AoE. Now, I have seen this suggested many times from different community members. I've seen different Diablo 2 mods implement splash damage as a way of trying to provide melee with some source of AoE. I have also messed around with a couple different hero edited items that provide, for instance, the chance to cast Corpse Explosion when you kill an enemy. So again, providing melee with a different form of AoE. I definitely think this would help sort of bridge the gap between casters and melee, because you have Javazons that can obliterate entire packs of cows, even like a Fire Druid with casting Volcano, Armageddon, and Fissure in different locations. You're just getting a lot of area of effect damage, where Melee is just slowly slogging, killing one monster, moving to the next, and moving to the next. I mean, with the exception of like hybrid assassin setups using Death Sentry, or I guess like Tesladins, maybe relying on Rune Words for AoE, Melee just doesn't have AoE. And I'm going to post-edit some footage showing a Concentrate Barb using a here-edited rumor that has chance to cast Corpse Explosion when you kill an enemy, and just seeing Melee have a source of AoE, it definitely would sort of remove or dissolve the gap between casters and Melee, and I think this is a welcome idea. Now, of course, it's sort of difficult to balance this properly and please everybody, but I think the easiest approach would be providing more Melee-oriented Rune Words that have sources of AoE. So Dual Dream, your Holy Shock Aura, that's AoE, some sort of chance to cast Corpse Explosion on a Rune Word, or anything like that that just provides Melee with AoE, I think would be a welcome change, and I really, really like this point. Point number 4 is fantastic. Point number 5 is relatively simple and straightforward, and that's just to buff base weapon damage across the board. So Colossus Blades, Colossus Swords, Berserker Axes, etc., increasing the minimum and maximum damage values of those weapon bases will have the intended consequence of making Rune Words like Breath of the Dying and Death more powerful, but not necessarily buffing Grief much. So this would open up different alternatives of weapon choices and would actually make some of the less sought after and desirable Rune Words a little bit more popular. So I think the idea here of giving Melee more weapon choices across the board would be a very welcome change. Point number 6 is altering the initial damage values of Melee skills at early levels and the scaling of them at early levels as well. So this has been done in the past with Whirlwind. So for those that don't know, a couple patches ago, Whirlwind used to start with negative 50 damage, and they changed it so that it starts at plus 30 damage at level 1, but then by the time you've invested 30 skill points, it basically ends up being the same positive net damage. So the idea here is to make Melee more usable and strong at early levels, but keep the damage scaling towards late game relatively the same, because this is very apparent if you compare a very budget Blizzard Sorceress to a very budget Whirlwind Barbarian, what you can clear and how fast you can clear. There's a huge difference there, but an endgame Whirlwind Barbarian starts to catch up. It doesn't quite close the gap, but it's definitely closer. So the idea here is to just make Melee at low levels a little bit more usable, and I think it's a good idea. So point number 7 is a very interesting idea, and that's to substantially buff the life value of elite mobs and bosses. Now you'll notice a one-on-one encounter with Diablo, a Melee character that has a lot of Crushing Blow will typically clear that monster a lot faster, and even becomes more apparent when you take Ubers into account. Now the idea here is to add more of these high-value life targets in an area like Chaos Sanctuary, so that caster characters are slowed down, but Melee characters have a little bit more of incentive to stack more Crushing Blow and can clear those monsters a little bit faster to bring the clear speed times a little bit closer together. So I actually really like this idea, and I think a lot of players that are looking for a more challenging, scenario in D2R would be on board with this idea as well. But I definitely like it. It incentivizes players to stack more Crushing Blow than what they normally would for a PvM scenario, and would potentially bring Melee closer to casters in terms of clear speed. So a very solid idea. It would be relatively simple to implement, but would have a pretty big impact for Melee, at least in my opinion. The next point is to allow a Zod rune to grant Ethereal status as well as an indestructible mod. So you could take an item like Grandfather that's always indestructible, punch a hole in it, put a Zod rune in it, and then make it ethereal for more damage. This would potentially add more value to Zod, as well as open up potential weapon options for Melee characters. Would be interesting to see items like Grandfather and Doombringer actually have a chance of being used, because being ethereal would provide more damage, and you could get some pretty interesting stats like the Deadly Strike on Grandfather, the massive life pool on Doombringer. Either option would be more desirable to use if those particular items could roll ethereal, and changing the properties that a Zod rune adds would be interesting. It is already the rarest rune that's almost typically never used, so I like the idea. So point number 9 is to remove the ladder stat buffs for mobs. I actually didn't even know this was a thing, so apparently ladder mobs have increased health, armor, and a few other attributes to make them a little bit stronger to their non-ladder counterparts, which mostly impacts Melee versus casters. So again, the idea, similar to removing the faster run walk defense and % chance of block penalty, this, I don't see why you can't remove it as well. It doesn't impact casters, it would help Melee a little bit, and kind of interesting because I didn't even know that these different stats existed. But yeah, I'm on board, remove the stats. It's not going to affect casters and would make Melee a little bit stronger. So the second last point is to buff two-handed weapons in some way, shape, or form to incentivize Melee characters to use something other than Grief. I think this is a great idea. It could be accomplished via a couple different methods. One would be just two-handed weapons grant extra base damage regardless, just because you're getting more power. Like your two hands, you're swinging a larger weapon, they should do more damage than a single-handed weapon. You could also alternatively maybe get more of a damage return for strength investment on a two-handed weapon versus a single-handed weapon. So again, incentivizing players to use something other than a Phase Blade and Grief would be a welcome change. More diversity in weapon choices would always be a good thing, at least in my opinion, so I definitely welcome the idea of buffing two-handed weapons in some way, shape, or form. So the final point is to incentivize players to use medium and heavy type armors instead of always using essentially a Dust Shroud, Archon Plate, or a Mage Plate. Now, as it currently stands, there's just no reason to use a medium or heavy type based armor because it's a lot more strength to equip that item, and you don't really gain too much more defense, and we already talked about previous in this video about how defense isn't super desirable as a melee character anyway. So providing an inherent percent DR bonus on medium and heavy body armors would make it worth your while to invest, 150 or 200 points into strength to equip like a sacred armor or, the full plate mail or whatever it is. It would just incentivize players to use something other than the current everything is made in an Archon Plate syndrome. I think that's what he put here. Every rumored is in a Mage Plate or Archon Plate status quo. There we go. This would incentivize players to use something else, and I think it would be a welcome change and add some extra survivability. So let's add some DR to medium and heavy type body armors so that we can use something else besides an Archon Plate, Mage Plate, or a Dust Shroud. So that wraps up today's video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Again, the idea was sort of to stimulate discussion on improvements for Melee in patch 2.6, but let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree, disagree, or you would tweak anything. I'm on board for most of these changes. I really don't think they would have a profound impact, and I think they would make Melee a little bit closer to casters to sort of incentivize players to play anything other than a sorceress. I think would be a good thing for the game. But again, feedback is always welcome. Just let me know in the comment section below. Other than that, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, if you could throw a like on it, that'd be amazing. And I'll catch you guys on my next video or live stream. Peace out.